This episode is sponsored by Leonard. Leonard is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at lino.com/adventures in Angular. Hey everybody, and welcome to another Adventures in Angular show. This week on our panel we have Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
Ward Bell.
That's the curmudgeon-y Ward Bell to you, according to Joe.
No, he looked it up. It was curmudgeon Lee.
I know, but I like curmudgeon-y.
Don't be a curmudgeon about being curmudgeonly.
Okay.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. And this week we have a special guest, that's Zack Chapple.
Hey, everybody.
Do you want to give us a brief introduction to who you are, what you do?
Yeah, my name's Zack Chapple. I'm actually a software architect at Career Builder and the founder and the main organizer for NG Atlanta.
Awesome. And we also have Kim Maida, who will be joining us a little bit later. We are making her install Skype as we speak, and we decided to just kick things off and get things warmed up before she is, whenever she gets here. So looking forward to that. Zack, you mentioned NG Atlanta, and I know that NG Atlanta is something that people are talking about these days, and it dovetails into more of our topic as far as diversity. All of these terms are so loaded with, people having feelings about them that I kind of hesitate to use any of them. But let's just start there. Let's start with NG Atlanta, and you sent us your NG Atlanta origin story. Do you want to just explain where that came from and what the inspiration there is, and then we can kind of move into the other topics from there?
Yeah. So do you kind of want me to walk through the origin story a little bit?
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Why don't you tell them what NG Atlanta is? And let's make sure that we get that point across. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. So NG Atlanta is a 2-day workshop, 2-day single-track conference in a suburb of Atlanta called Alpharetta, in a brand new conference venue. It's a conference focused on diversity, inclusion, and Angular. There's a little bit of mix from topics that surround Angular, so technologies that are related to Angular. Our goal was kind of to present a holistic viewpoint for our attendees.
So on this podcast today, we've got 4 old white guys ready to tell you all about a diversity conference, and that's really I think that's really good because we just never get a chance to speak, do we? Oh, goodness. All right. We are self-aware of this one. We hope Kim comes to rescue us soon.
Yes. Well, it's also interesting, too, because even though, like you said, we are 4 white guys, but, you look at kind of being able to leverage, where we are in technology. So I, as an architect and as someone who spoke at NGConf, I have some very unique opportunities and connections I've made because of that. And that actually made organizing this conference a lot easier. So I was able to reach out to speakers who I've seen and leverage a little bit of my experience to help build the conference. So I wouldn't completely discount our experiences, but at the same time, we should be able to leverage that to help people who are underrepresented in our industry.
I'm going to bite my tongue and ask you about NG Atlanta here for a minute so that we can get some context about what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then we can dive in, hopefully, with Kim here to talk a little bit more about, what people experience as part of our community.
Okay, that'd be awesome. What would you like me to share about NG Atlanta? Kind of the origin?
Yeah, why don't you start with the origin story, and then you can talk a little bit more about exactly what you're trying to do to promote diversity and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, so it's actually kind of an interesting story because part of it that I didn't include in the origin story was a conversation that kind of got this diversity even more on my brain. And that was a conversation with my boss at Career Builder, and he was sharing a story about how his 8-year-old daughter had come home from school and said she didn't want to be a scientist anymore. She had always talked about being a scientist. And when he asked her why, she said that girls can't be scientists. And, obviously we were both kind of puzzled about that. And then he shared why she thought that. Apparently, one of the boys in her school had told her, at 8 years old, that girls can't be scientists. And he and I were both kind of upset about that, and for obvious reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually the next week that I was going on vacation with my family. And we went to Savannah, Georgia, and we were driving back. And, my wife's sleeping. She was pregnant at the time. And my 2 boys and my daughter are sleeping in the back. And I was just sitting there thinking about, what that conversation, thinking about how I've been an open evangelist for women in technology, my teams, particularly my team at ADP. I had a team of 8, 5 of them were women in technology. And I always tried to be a public advocate and also, behind the scenes advocating for, people on my team and starting WIT programs and stuff like that. But, that's an incredibly small sphere of influence. And I tried to think about what I could do that was outside of me and the direct company I work at. And I thought, what about if I tried to organize a conference and try to get at least 50% of the speakers to be women in technology? And being someone who loves Angular, I wanted it to be an Angular conference. And I thought, that would be really hard. I've never seen anyone get even close to that. And so, the 5-hour drive, I just sat there thinking about that. And by the time I got home, I convinced myself that, yes, this is a challenge I want to take on. And I said, okay, I'm going to pull the trigger on it. So I started messaging speakers that I knew who were women in technology. I'm saying, hey, I have this idea. I want to run this conference. Would you like to be a speaker at this conference? And, I told them my goal is to get at least 50%. And my initial thoughts were just a tiny conference, single day, just keep it simple. And within 3 days, I was at 85% of that day filled up with female speakers. And I'm like, well, that was too easy. Let's make it harder. So I expanded the conference to 2 days. And I added 2 days of workshops, and I decided, okay, let's just go full on with this. And so we're sitting right now at like 65% because, life happens and you have some speaker attrition. But yeah, so now we're at 60%. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, what else can we do to influence the software industry? So I'm like, well, what if I try to get 50% of my attendees to be women in technology? And that's where we started like our diversity scholarship program, which a lot of those scholarships are going to WIT and GDI. We started our student scholarship program. We also started a veteran scholarship program. So if you think about underrepresented folks in technology, veterans are also an underrepresented group. So if you think about that, helping them is also incredibly important. So we just started to let this snowball, and it's been really interesting because the community's picked up on it, and there's been a lot of messed up things that have happened in our community, as with a lot of communities, and I think people, at least some of the people I've talked to, look at NG Atlanta and say, there's a lot of conferences that don't have any female speakers. Did they try to do it? And then a lot of organizers will be like, well, yeah, I tried, and there's no women out there. And it's like, well, there really is if you're at least somewhat intentional with trying to find people. And the thing is, you don't have to sacrifice content. You don't have to sacrifice the quality of your conference. You just do a little legwork. And it's been a really fun adventure. But the other thing that we tried to do, and excuse me if I ramble a little bit, it's kind of hard to get it all out of my brain at once. The other thing we try to do is to present an entire picture of the ecosystem it is we work at, right? So if you look at a lot of conferences focus very specifically on a given technology. Some conferences do a better job by spreading it out to surrounding technologies. But what we try to do is to look at the developer as a whole and say, okay, yes, I know about Angular. Yes, I know about Webpack. Yes, I know about NativeScript. But what do you know about like emotional intelligence, right? How do you interact with your teammates better? How do you become a better in the community as a whole? And that's where that whole idea of building the holistic picture of the development environment came into play. And it really kind of drives down to the model for the Angular team, right? You can sit with us. That's not just a slogan for the team. It's something that we should embody in our community. And that requires more than just raw code skills.
Yeah, I really like the idea of just, the holistic approach where you're focused on not just the technical skills, which I think a lot of conferences do because it's easy, right? It either works or it doesn't. And so it's here's how you do a hard thing in tech, and look, it works. Focusing on community, focusing on these holistic interpersonal skills, and, having conversations about it, I think really, it really helps. And one conference talk that stands out to me just along these lines, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Greg Bogus. He's a developer evangelist for Twilio, but a number of years ago, he gave a talk about depression. And initially, when I heard the talk, I was like, give me a break, right? This is a Ruby conference. This is not a feel-good conference. But as I thought about it, I was like, you know what? People actually feel this. And some of it is tied to what they do and who they are. And so if we can work around that, it just seems like a really positive thing to focus on, because it's hey, look, we're developers, but we're also humans, and here's how we deal with human stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also as a side note, just to kind of, I guess, a testimonial to this kind of content, we had Greg on Ruby Rogues not too long after that. And about 2 or 3 years later, I ran into somebody who basically thanked me publicly for having him on the show. I mean, I didn't do anything, right? He was a guest on the show, so I was there for an hour. And this other developer basically said, I listened to that show and realized I needed help. And so again, if we're having these conversations and saying, look, here's a healthy way to figure out what you're dealing with, it makes a difference to people.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's one of the talks at NG Atlanta will hopefully help with that too, because we have one on compassionate coding. There's one of the speakers, her name's April Wenzel. I think that talk will really help with that topic.
Yep. So we just looped Kim in. Hi, Kim.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yep. Awesome.
Great.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So I'm going to ask some. I think they're leading questions, but they're also some of the harder questions. And anybody feel free to chime in. But one of the things that I see, you talked about having 50% of the speakers be women, or 50% of the attendees be women. And I mean, the industry as a whole, I hear numbers anywhere between like 10 and 25% of the industry is women, and the rest are men. And I haven't heard any good numbers as far as any type of minority, racial minority or otherwise, other kinds of minorities. There are other kinds of minorities, and I don't want to leave anybody out. But at the same time, I mean, if you hit sort of the industry distribution of people, I mean, why is that not good enough? I've heard this argument before, right? So if the industry is between 75 and 90% men, then what's wrong with a conference that has 75 to 90% men as speakers or attendees?
Well, if I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's fair to put the burden of an answer on a question on Kim exactly.
No. I'm asking in general because I've heard it. I have my own thoughts on it, but I don't want to taint the conversation completely with my crazy thoughts, right?
I mean, if a conference is going to take this task on, then representing the population, our terrible numbers in our industry, isn't going to isn't itself a goal. Mm-hmm. So the goal is to try and create an overwhelming sense that there is an opportunity here, that there's capability here, and to drive that. And that's one reason I would like to be at a conference that had didn't have the numbers that we have today, but had the numbers that are more like what we would hope to see in our industry. talking with us, so we could better imagine what the world might be like if we were operating on all cylinders instead of with, the way we are today. That would be my instinct.
So I would definitely agree with that. And then I think I would also add that, to be honest, I don't think that a lot of tech conferences are actually representing the industry statistics as a whole. Basically because when I go to work, I may know a lot more female developers, may work with a lot more minorities, and then when I go to a conference, it's not actually directly correlated in numbers as far as representation at conferences. And I think part of that is just a lot of people won't necessarily go if they feel like everybody who's speaking at that conference, everybody who's attending that conference is going to be a certain demographic that they are not. So I do think it's very important to have conferences where we do have a lot of, speakers and minorities on, and, other genders represent the thing that people are interested in, so that all types of people will want to go and attend.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually kind of interesting because kind of what Ward and Kim were both saying is that there's a whole conversation of, is it a pipeline problem or is it a retention problem? And I think, when people have asked me, how do I get so many women in technology on my team? It's usually, once you have one or two women on your team and you've created a safe environment, a welcoming environment, and somewhere that they don't feel lambasted every day, it's really easy to grow that team. And with the conference, by having a really high percentage of women speakers, and by having a really high percentage of women in the audience, we could say, you know what, this industry is welcoming to you. We are trying to change things. Go ahead, come out to this industry, stay in this industry. We want you to be part of this conversation. We want you to contribute. That in and of itself can help to change that overall demographic. At least that's my hope as an organizer, is that, by showing people that this is possible, other conferences will want to step up, other organizations will want to step up, and other developers, particularly, people that look like me, will want to have other voices at the table and say, you know what, that was a fantastic idea. How do I become a part of that?
So I think it's interesting, and I think there's a larger, I guess, idea behind this, where part of it is, what we want people that, I guess, look like the attendees that we want, or look like the people we want to feel welcome in the community. Are there other things that we're doing in our conferences that also make them feel welcome? And the other thing, I guess, there is with that, and I know I'm trying not to be antagonistic or sound antagonistic, because I'm mostly just interested. But with that, is that kind of the first thing that people look at when they go look at a conference website, or are there other things that give them some kind of indication that, I'm going to come and have the experience that I want to have? In other words, is it the speaker list, or is there more to it than that?
I definitely think that there's more to it. I've been to several tech conferences, and I've seen sort of the types of demographics, and obviously I've been to tech conferences where there are maybe 5% women in attendance, and I still have a great time. I learn a lot, I network a lot, I talk to a lot of people, and I think there's a sense of camaraderie at conferences that just stems from being interested in the same types of things that you get from the attendees, and then the speaker list, of course. And in the past, as a minority, I've sort of felt like it's awesome when there are, women or minorities on stage, and that makes me feel especially welcome, and it makes me feel sort of more close to the people who are representing at the conference as speakers. But a lack of that hasn't deterred me personally from attending conferences, because it is all about the people. So I think I kind of derailed myself here. But I guess I just wanted to say that there's definitely attraction at these conferences that comes from just being interested in the same things and being exposed to more of a community that does the same thing that you do. And in general, tech conferences have been very welcoming. So it's especially awesome to me to see one that does have a focus on diversity and having, a diverse panel of speakers. So that's very exciting to me. And then you add that with the sort of general, we're all interested in the same thing. We all came here to learn. We want to learn from each other and teach each other.
Hey, Kim, can you tell us a little bit about your road to this conference, how you became part of it, and what your hopes are for it?
Sure. Well, I've been going to NGConf for a while now. I've been to 3 NGConfs, so I think I was only missing one. And then before that, I would go to AiA, which actually has a much higher sort of diversity rate because there's more of a focus on like content and design in that one, as well as like framework technology and programming. And basically, I had just come from Angular Connect very recently in London this year, and I met a lot of community participants, including a few women who were speaking at NG Atlanta, and that got me very interested in NG Atlanta, and I sort of started looking more into it, and I was like, I wonder, if there's a way I can be involved in this, and it sort of just went from there. I was very excited to see people that I met who I have tremendous respect for in the community who, were going to speak at this conference as well. And I just sort of followed suit, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I have to say I'm looking forward to it just as a vision, of what it would be like to be in a conference that looked like the population I would want to be part of. And I imagine I can't be the only person to feel that way. But because all of us who have been to conferences, males anyway, who've been to conferences for a long time, have for years talked about how our conferences just don't look like the worlds we live in and breathe in every day, and they feel wildly distorted. And that, oddly enough, some of us feel uncomfortable about that. And so it's going to be, just personally, it's going to be a rich experience to be surrounded by people who, in a way that is the way I want to see it.
I'm kind of curious, Ward, and just to kind of pick on that a little bit. What is it about that world that you kind of envision as being different? I mean, besides just walking through and feeling like, oh, I generally see as many people of diverse background as I see walking through Walmart. Is there more to it than that?
Well, sure, because I'm having tech conversations with all these people.
Okay.
Right? This is not like, aren't the colors pretty? It makes a lovely photograph. This is an opportunity to have the kinds of serious tech conversations, which, by the way, my serious conversations are full of laughs and jokes and giggles and all that stuff. I consider giggling along with the technology to be part of why I'm still, after all these years, doing anything with tech. And but I want to have, I expect to have that, serious conversations. As we've talked about here, hallway conversations are a big part of why I go to conference, and I'm expecting to have all of that, and I'm expecting to see a range of ages and concerns and opportunities to both collaborate and encourage. And that's what I'm looking for.
It's really fun too, because it kind of reminds me of home. I mean, I grew up in Minneapolis, and my high school was 26% white. So having an incredibly diverse set of speakers, it just feels at home for me. And it's the amount of different problems that people experience, different backgrounds, different, everything about people. Having that perspective is incredibly valuable, even when you're talking about the exact same technology or the, exact same, framework. I mean, the way we approach things, gender, ethnicity, religion, all of those things. I mean, heck, even diet. We have vegans and vegetarians coming to the conference too. They approach things, sometimes differently too, if it's a certain type of problem, right? A grocery shopping app may be completely different for someone who's vegan than it is for someone who is an omnivore, right? So, just those different perspectives are incredibly valuable.
Well, and just to add on to that, and this is the thing, like when people ask me about diversity and they start talking about what's fair, my brain kind of turns off, I'll be honest. But when they start talking about this diversity of experience, right, where, women go through different things than men, people who grew up in different places and in different backgrounds with different religions go through different things and they approach problems differently. And, Zach, you mentioned earlier in the show that, we're all whole entire people. We're not just programmers. And so that informs the entire experience that people have. I mean, that's why this matters, at least to me, is that it enhances my experience and makes me stretch and grow in ways that I never would if I was just talking to a whole bunch of other people that are just like me.
So are we making any sense here, Kim? Or what are we missing?
I kind of dropped it in the middle of this, so
yeah.
I'm still sort of catching up.
Well, I think it's a really unique opportunity because we can kind of see where the industry is through people's reactions. And just to kind of let you guys know a little bit of background, like I added a bunch of people who had Angular in their LinkedIn profile and directly messaged them about the conference. And the vast majority, so I've messaged close to 1,000 people so far, and almost everyone has given very positive reactions to the conference or the content or the speakers. But there's been a couple people in particular who are like, I have absolutely no interest in that conference. And one guy in particular said, I followed up with a question. I was like, so what about the conference did not interest you? And he said the word diversity. And I had to pause for a second, like, are you trolling me or are you serious? And I just replied, thank you for your feedback. But, it made me think like there really is people just seeing that word turns them off. But I don't know how to get across to them that there's an incredible value in this and helping people to understand that that's kind of where my struggle is. And I don't know the answer to that yet.
So I've talked to a lot of people, and some people have expressed the same thing to me. Usually when I start digging into this with folks, so some people feel like, diversity, it's a great thing. They see a lot of benefits from it. They feel like they're helping people. And all of those are very positive things. The people that have negative experiences, they usually feel like it's been used as a bludgeon to make them feel bad about who they are. And I think that comes from a misunderstanding of what the diversity movement is about, and from some people who sometimes get a little bit overzealous. But I also think there's a cultural factor to it where people, they come up in with particular backgrounds where, the diversity thing has been talked about in a specific way. And so no matter how you present it, it's just going to come across as, well, you're in the majority, so there's something wrong with you. And I don't feel like that's really what diversity has been about at all. And I know I've had to fight this within myself some, but at the same time, I can definitely see where some people look at it, and due to all of these factors coming in, they take it as a negative experience that they'd have if they came, as opposed to a positive opportunity to grow and get to know some different kinds of people.
I think diversity can be sort of polarizing because it attracts some types of people, right, and it repels others. Especially, I'm involved with a lot of the hiring that we do at my company, and we're trying to sort of include more people with different backgrounds, more genders. We're looking to get a diversity inclusion program started. And so when you go out and sort of look at the landscape and see people's experiences, like other hiring managers, other companies, just people, on the ground, to see what their sort of reaction is to things like that, is a lot of times people will sort of think that you're pushing an agenda. Like they'll say, well, if you have, two equally qualified candidates, you shouldn't give any preference to one or the other. You should continue, sort of digging deeper and finding out who's straight up just like the better candidate, regardless of any sort of diversity initiatives. And I think so. People who have a perspective of sort of feeling like they might actually be excluded by a diversity initiative, might see that word and then think, oh, well, am I less welcome? Sort of, what you were saying. Is this in some way going to exclude me? When actually, technically you would hope that diversity means everybody, right? Not just minorities, not just women, not just other genders, other religions. It would be, everybody in the world is included. And I think that's where people sort of start to feel excluded when we're hoping they shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
But it would, be my hope that someday you could sort of remove the word diversity from the conference and it would still be the same conference and still attract like everybody. And, you could maintain the same amount of diversity without having to say it's the diversity conference. So I'm hoping that
there's a couple of things about what you said I'd like to chat about. First off, I think it's interesting when people say, hey, if you got two equal candidates, right, and you prefer one over the other because of one reason, say you got two equal candidates, we're going to choose either the woman or the person who isn't Caucasian, right?
Yep.
Well, first, for one thing, the idea that two people are ever truly equal is pretty ridiculous, unless your only heuristic is a score on a test, right? Well, we got two people that scored 90 on this test, and now let's pick the one who is, a non-white dude, I guess, right? So other than that, that's a pretty ridiculous statement, being a conference organizer and constantly being faced with a decision like this. The other thing that's silly is because, let's say when you're choosing talks for a conference, there's no way that you can truly know who's going to give the best talk, right? It's like hiring people. When you choose talks, you're using your own chosen heuristic for deciding who's going to speak at a conference. So it might be that they write the best looking presentation by what words they use. That has nothing to do with their presentation skills. You might look at presentations that they've given. Well, because somebody's given a good presentation in the past does not guarantee they're going to give good ones in the future. I've given terrible presentations and talks after I've given great ones. So that's also not a guarantee. You still have to choose some heuristic to choose things. So you're still making a guess as to who's going to give a great talk. That's just a truth and reality of being a conference organizer. So I think that some of those things are a little bit interesting to say, well, if you got two equal candidates, you shouldn't be choosing or excluding. But I also think what you said something about, diversity being inclusive of everybody. I don't think that it's particularly what's the word I'm trying to look for here? Like, I know that nobody's trying to find more white dudes to show up to their conference, right?
Right.
True.
I mean, that's not true. That's not going to happen. And we could say, hey, obviously white men are going to be welcome, but they're going to be the majority likely of a tech conference anyway. You don't have to try to get them to come. It's everybody else you actually have to try. So if somebody feels put out that you're not trying, if you're not trying to get me to come, you're not working extra to get me to show up to your conference. Well, I'm sorry, but you're going to show up anyway. You're easy to find. It's harder to find everybody else. It's harder to find people that are of color or women and get them to come out because even though the numbers are somewhere between 10 and 25%, when you look at some of the numbers for, say, things like front-end developers, like people who are employed as full-time front-end developers, the numbers are actually below 10%. At least most of the numbers that I see are actually below 10%. So it's hard to find those people and reach them. It's just very difficult. So you got to work.
I think you made an interesting point because you talked about looking at the abstracts, looking at the talks. And I think part of that also comes down to, I kind of introspectively, right? As I selected speakers, there's also kind of that unconscious bias too of people whose speech patterns match yours, people who write in a similar pattern to yours. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing that I have to try and keep aware of, because I'll naturally gravitate people from the northern United States who write and speak like I do. And regardless of ethnicity or gender, but even that level of bias and it's not necessarily malicious bias, right? But it's like those people write like I do. It's easy to understand. So I may get what they're trying to get across a lot easier. Whereas someone from Israel or Denmark or China, I may struggle. Well, China I don't because I speak Chinese, but it may be harder for some people to understand that. But that doesn't. You got to kind of add that into your evaluation process, I think.
Yep, good point. Which is actually particularly difficult because a lot of this is one of the few criteria you have. So if your point is when you're looking at submissions to choose is, hey, I'm going to pick the best written submission, right? Well, what is familiar to me and what is at least better writing or more thought put into it oftentimes looks the same, right? So somebody who speaks like me is oftentimes going to look the same as somebody who is either a native speaker, right? If you're a non-native speaker, you have a hard time writing a great presentation abstract, obviously, right? And so that doesn't mean that you're not going to give a great talk if you're a non-native speaker. You can they could be a fantastic presenter and give a fantastic talk being a non-native speaker, but they might mess up some of the grammar on the submission. So you look and you think, oh, well, this person put more time and effort because they put their punctuation in the right place and they got all the grammar right, but the reality may not be what's going on behind that. And so it's not just about speech patterns, it's about the fact that the speech patterns you're familiar with oftentimes look like just a better done presentation or submission. The two things follow one another. It masquerades as that. And it just makes it particularly challenging when you want to pick speakers and you're picking choose from non-native speakers, or in this case, we're talking about English, obviously, non-native English speakers, but who still are very capable of giving fantastic presentations.
Well, I'm looking at some of the titles of these talks here. How about Try Not to Lose Your Marbles with RxJS, or Singular Angular Elements, Building VR Interfaces with Angular, The Dark Side of Turning Angular Performance. I'm telling you, as I read these are really good topics, and you couldn't tell, until look at the picture, who's giving it. So we're going to have, you're going to have some good talks here. And then we're going to find out who's actually the voice and the face behind this. I'm looking forward to State Management NRGRX, as you all know. And that's my friend Simona going to give it. And so I'm going to have to give her a hard time. Hey, and you know what? That's going to be, we're going to have fun doing that, right? With each other in a respectful way, but we're going to have a fun time mixing it up. And that, that's what a conference should be. So, this is This is a serious conference. This isn't, we're just trotting out some figureheads and they're not going to have anything to say.
Right.
Yep.
Well, the other hard part is, how do you give people who have never spoken at a conference before the opportunity to speak? Because those are the hardest ones to evaluate, right? Because they don't have anything online. Their abstract probably won't be the best written. But at the same time, they have an incredibly valuable topic or an incredibly good story to share. I mean, how do you, that's the other hard thing, is how do you get those voices out there?
You know what? We should help those people with their talks. I as a first-time speaker, that was tough. I blew my first talks, and I didn't have anybody to bounce it off against when I was first coming out because nobody knew me, right? And now I can prepare by A, I kind of know what I'm doing, and B, I got plenty of people I can share it with. So maybe, Zach, what we should, and I don't know how much you've done it, but maybe it would be great to pair some of the first-time speakers with people, in background who can sort of preview and coach some of the folks so that their first or second time on the big stage, they can approach with more confidence.
Well, I want to jump in here as well, because this is an interesting topic, because now you're talking about another aspect of diversity, and that is people who haven't spoken before, right? So if you're considering that one of the axes of diversity, I think I would challenge that as an aspect of diversity. Similar to the thought of, hey, would you look and say, hey, if you're hiring for a position, would you hire the person who's never coded before, thinking, hey, they potentially are a good coder? Yes, you would. But if you're looking for a senior developer, you're probably not going to hire the person who's never coded before, right? So now we're talking, you just naturally get better at the things you do. People who speak get better at speaking. So the more that somebody has spoken, the likelier that they are to give a better talk. The more that somebody has written code, the likelier they are to write good code. So those two things follow one another. So now you have to worry about, if you're going to put somebody up on stage who hasn't spoken ever before, and let me preface that by saying at NGConf, we've had first-time speakers. And, we consider ourselves to be definitely one of the bigger stages that is available in the tech world. And we put up first-time speakers, and we always feel like it's a very nerve-wracking experience for us. We want people to have taken time to work on this particular aspect, which is speaking. It's a craft. I've spent time specifically working on speaking. It is a craft and it is a learned skill. So we want people to do that, but we also, like Zach is saying, sometimes there's people that have really important things to say, and then you have to balance that out against their experience being a speaker. So I'm not particularly of the opinion of, hey, you should weigh somebody who hasn't spoken the same as somebody who has spoken before, or somebody who's given a serious number of talks.
Totally agree. But given that Zach has picked some people who, they're new to me, I don't know what their experience is. Why not give those people a hand so that their experience will be as confident and as good as it can be.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So, I don't know if Zach was able to do this as well, though I know that he reached out a lot to speakers. But like at NGConf, we make it very well known. We even put it on our CFP submission page that if you want help with your submission, the organizers are there to help you with your submission, that we will actually spend time working with you so that your submission looks as good as possible if you don't have much experience in submitting. And then once we are lucky that we actually have enough of a budget that once we do select speakers, we can offer them time with a speaking trainer as well. So we have that luxury. Most conferences don't. I mean, trust me, I run smaller conferences, and having a budget to spend $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 on a speaker trainer for your speakers is just not a reality in the vast majority of cases. So I think actually
I'm raising my hand. I'm no pro at teaching anybody else how to talk, and there are people who probably wonder whether I know how to talk. But I'm raising my hand to say that if Zach, if there's anybody that would think that they might get an ounce of help from anything that I might contribute, I'm available.
Awesome. I'm sure I'll make sure I put that out there.
Yeah, I was just going to point out that your opinions on Star Wars make your judgment a little bit suspect. But
Here.
Like I said, there may be no takers, but that I'm all for.
Well, and I think that's important. I've also seen the ngconf organizers do Q&As like online to help people, get ideas and submit and stuff that way. So, I think it's important that way. One other thing that, Zach, going back to one of the things that you pointed out was that, you just went out and invited people to come speak. And when I did Angular Dev Summit in September, one of the things that I had somebody point out that I had a lack of diversity on my speaking panel. And for the most part, I just really wanted great speakers. I hadn't really even thought about that. But, they were like, look, you don't have any, or you don't have enough women on your speaking roster. And then they offered to help. And I found that was also very helpful, was just, oh, okay, well, some great speakers who help you or help the community at large, have a larger diversity pool in their speaking pool. Awesome. And Tracy Lee actually helped me line up a bunch of those speakers. And so, I also want to just point out to conference organizers that, Zach, you went and did a lot of the legwork on your own and reached out to people you already knew, but you also went and found people on LinkedIn. But there are folks out there that if you reach out to them and say, who else do you know? If this is something that's important to you, they will make it really, really easy for you.
Yeah, Tracy's a good one for that too. She actually has a list on Twitter called Fempire, which is, female speakers and female engineers.
Hey, so I'd like to ask an interesting question based on what you're saying, based on some personal experience here. Let's say that you happen to notice a conference that has 0 women speaking. Is that a time to jump out and call out that conference and say, hey, you're doing something wrong. You guys have not, you haven't done this right. There's something wrong with what you're doing. And I guess I'm talking a little bit about what we see oftentimes people that we call social justice warriors do, but engage in that. Is that an appropriate time to do that?
Well, I don't know how else you're going to move it unless somebody calls them on it.
Well, and it was interesting because I don't know if you guys saw or not, but GitHub actually got hit by that pretty hard last year. They had I think it was the Electron conference that they had like 15, I don't know how many speakers, but they had some amount of speakers, and all of them were of a very similar demographic, and there was a huge community uprising from that, and I think they actually ended up canceling the conference because of the reaction of the community.
Well, I also want to chime in because the worst experiences I've seen conference organizers have with this is when they claim to be going out of their way to provide diversity and then fail to do so. And GitHub has been out there as a champion publicly for that particular cause. And a few others that I've seen they put on their front page, we're a big diverse conference, and then all their speakers are white dudes. And so, if you're making those claims and then you're not backing them up, I definitely see people, coming out and saying, hey, you're saying one thing and doing another. One other thing, though, that I have seen, I know several conference organizers, and I know a few of them that have been terrified that this kind of thing would happen to them, and they just really didn't know how to, create more diversity in their conferences. And they either got called out or they walked around in fear of getting called out. And in reality, nobody offered to help them out, and they just didn't know what to do. And so I kind of come at this from both ends. If you're going to go out there and claim to be a diverse conference, be a diverse conference. If you want help, go try and find it. But if you're seeing a conference that is out there that looks like they're not making major claims one way or the other, and you think they could do better, offer to help them first.
So I want to add in a little counterpoint here and put a little context around a scenario, right? So I was involved a couple of years ago with a conference that was a local regional conference. Okay, it was just centered around a very small area. The conference had essentially zero budget, right? If anything, it was likely to break even. Everybody who organized was always completely volunteering their time, and that included me, of which when I said that I was organizing, I didn't actually show up or do anything. I just said that I would help, but then I ended up not having any time to give. So it's a local regional conference, no budget to fly in speakers, thing like that, only pulling from local speakers. It ended up that when everything was all said and done, it didn't have any female speakers. It turns out part of the problem is that not a single female speaker submitted. So there's a gazillion ways that we could have solved that issue, but each of those ways involved people spending time and or money that everybody was already having problems doing because, it's a completely volunteer. Everybody who's involved is already full doing other things, right? And they ended up getting some slack. And so finally I who had really not done anything because I didn't have time, ended up spending a few hours of my own time and reaching out to a few places. And I ended up getting like 1 or 2 women to come and speak because, we had to address this issue. But in this case, we were addressing it as simply a reaction for how we looked, right? That people were frustrated with how it looked. And it was a sort of a reaction. Now, regardless of whether the conference was made better or worse, I would argue that it was because I managed to find a couple of really good, I think I found 2 speakers that were women that were good speakers. But in that situation, is that the right thing for people to do? For people to jump in and say, hey, even though you're coming from a state that is 98% white, and you're a local regional conference in a state that's 98% white, and you didn't have a single female that submitted, should we have either decided, hey, we can't even run a conference if we can't spend the time and energy, because it does take work, right? From the conferences that I actually spend time organizing, that I care, that I really involve myself in order to keep the diversity up, we spend hours and hours and hours on this issue, working to find more diverse attendees, working to find more diverse speakers. It takes time and money. So should you, when considering running a local conference, is having diversity one of those must-have lines? If you can't find the time and energy to put diversity in, should you just say, then we shouldn't do the conference?
Well, I mean, as someone else is organizing too, it's an incredible time sink to organize a conference, as you said, right? A vast majority of the time that we've been doing NG Atlanta has been about 90% just me working on it in my nights, and weekends. Which, if you think about where NG Atlanta is right now, I mean that's a ton of work. But I think you'll find, at least in Atlanta, and actually GitHub was one of our first sponsors, interestingly enough, and they sponsored diversity tickets. I think if you are intentional with what you are trying to do and vocal about what you're trying to do, organizations and other people will align to help. At least that was my experience. Your mileage may vary, but when I got out and I was vocal about what it is I was trying to do, organizations, I mean, heck, people are spending their own money to help sponsor the diversity tickets. That to me says that the community wants this, and they will help back it if you are vocal about it.
Right. But you didn't necessarily respond to my question, which was, if you don't know that you have that time and that energy, should you even bother? Should you do a conference if you don't know? In this case, like I'm talking about, it was really just a bunch of thoughtless people who didn't spend it never became a priority when they organized the conference, right? And so nobody was thinking about it from the standpoint of diversity, and didn't put in the time and effort. Once somebody started putting in time and effort, it became a very solvable problem. But are we at the place where we should basically say, hey, conferences should require, that should be a baseline for conferences. They should have a diverse lineup.
That sure is my instinct, in the same way that it's kind of a baseline to have a code of conduct. I mean, when I was coming up, they didn't have codes. They didn't have codes of conduct before. But now, if you don't have one, it's like that's an irresponsible conference. And so not to pillory somebody for what they did in the past, but going forward, if you're starting a conference today and you're not paying attention to this, then you're not putting together a responsible conference, and maybe you shouldn't be doing that kind of thing.
See,
I think that's Will's.
I disagree. but go ahead.
I'd argue that the amount of time involved is simple. Granted, I'm first-time conference organizer, but like I would argue that the time involved, if you have a Twitter account, is relatively similar than if you were not trying to do it, because there's enough resources on Twitter, in the Twitterverse. Granted, I assumed I would have budget, and just lived as if, right? And that helped to get to where we are. But if you know you will never have any hopes of having a budget, maybe that's better suited to be a meetup than a conference or something. I think that we should be intentional and try to improve the circumstances we're in, rather than just breaking windows and keep moving along.
I think I'm with Ward on this. That this really should. It's like a code of conduct. I think it's could be you could say that this is a baseline. In the case of, my experience, it was people that would be no different than if they had. And to be honest, the year previous, we didn't have a code of conduct. But when you get a conference that's organized by 10 or 15 different people, and every organization meeting is a different subset of 4 of them, having 55 things slip through the cracks is I could explain away what happened, but I would definitely say that what actually happened was wrong. Not having a code of conduct the year before, that was wrong. Not having a diverse lineup of speakers that second year, I think that we made a mistake. And that if I had been willing to put my name on it, I should have taken those things as baselines. And that if I wasn't willing to put in the time to make sure that those things got done, I shouldn't have attached my name to it.
So I just want to chime in here. I mean, for one thing, speaking of codes of conduct, my tune has changed a little bit on that. I used to think that they were complete garbage, but I've come to realize that you don't need a code of conduct until you need one. In other words, if you tell people what kind of behavior is expected, then when you enforce it, it's not a surprise for anybody, so you really should have one. As far as the, whether or not you should not have a conference if you can't meet these criteria, again, I mean, I think there are a few things that are going on. One is that I think most of you on the call are well enough connected to where, going to Twitter and doing a little bit of legwork isn't going to take that much more time to find people. But I also know that some of the local conference organizers are not that well connected. And conferences are such a net positive for any community that they're in that I really, really hesitate to say if you can't meet diversity standards, then you shouldn't have a conference, because so many people are going to miss out on that opportunity. And you're also going to set a baseline of being able to connect with people the next year based on that conference to where you probably can do better the next year. And so I can't quite get to the point where it's like, yep, scrap it, turn it all in, give up if you can't meet diversity standards. However, I also want I just want to caveat this. I don't want this to be an excuse for anybody not to try.
Look, I wouldn't hold a conference in a fire trap. I wouldn't hold a conference that was unsafe. I wouldn't hold a conference. I mean, there's all kinds of criteria.
Right.
Hey, in a fire truck, that sounds like an interesting challenge.
I think you said
fire trap.
Fire trap. Oh, I was thinking fire truck. That actually sounds kind of cool.
No, I mean, like we have other criteria. We wouldn't dream of having a conference that, where we didn't think about how people were supposed to, where they were going to come from or where they were going to stay or what the food was going to be. Well, if we're caring about the food and we're not caring about who's there, then
you might not care about food. I've been at conferences we didn't do anything about food. That was up to the attendees because it was either cheap or free or whatever.
You had to think about it.
But you do think about how safe they are.
Yeah.
You had to think about it. You had to decide whether you were going to have food or not. Right? And you made a decision. If people were going to come from somewhere, you had to figure out whether you were going to put them up or not. You had to think. You have to think about these things now. And when you suddenly wake up in this day and age, if you're not saying, all right, so who's showing up? Are the people who are going to attend going to feel like this is a wonderful place for them to be and that they're going to have a great experience? If you're not thinking about those things, then you're not a responsible conference organizer. Now, maybe you're having a meetup or a meeting or some where the bar is lower or somehow, and you can just throw anything together. But if it's a conference and you're asking people to attend them, then I think we have standards today that include a significant effort to make sure that both attendees and speakers represent different backgrounds. I don't know. That's where I'm coming from. I mean, it's not, it's kind of where we are. It's not where I would have necessarily said in 2007 or 1997 or, 1987 or something like that. But we live in this world today, and there are standards. And to me, it should, it's kind of like making sure that it's not a fire trap. Yeah, that's me.
Well, let me say that I've never been a fan of people who try to make the world better by tearing down everything that they don't like about us.
Yeah.
I've never been a fan of that. I've been a victim of that, certainly before. But I think that in the situation where you find, hey, there's a conference that's maybe not meeting that tearing it down may not be the best idea, although you were saying, Ward, that might
I've seen that happen. It sucks.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, in fact, there was a great example of a conference called Lambda Conf, which was torn down because of their decision to include diversity. But that for each of us and for a lot of people, it actually is a small amount to just say, hey, I'll help you fix an issue that I see.
Right. Agree. If you can get there in front, and if they got to the end and they actually printed tickets and they've got it all closed up and they haven't thought about it, then I got other conferences to go to.
Well, and that's totally fair too, right? If it doesn't line up with the kind of experience you want to have, or you feel like they're not making the inroads for the changes you want to see in the community, I think it's totally fair to not go.
Yep.
And I think we've totally talked over our guests. I don't know if they got a word in edgewise. Do either of you want to add anything?
Well, I will say that I definitely think that it's something that should be paid attention to in the beginning, and not as an afterthought, which I think everybody agrees on. But even for like local conferences, I don't necessarily think that I don't agree if you're running a small local conference and you don't have a budget that you should not do it at all if it does end up being an afterthought. If you can put in the effort at the end. And then also I feel like everybody knows somebody, and the opportunities that are given, especially like at NGConf, for example, to help people, even if you don't have $5,000 to spend on a speaker trainer, the organizers or other speakers can offer to help out new people. Everybody knows somebody who has something to contribute. Mm-hmm. And for example, I was asked recently, actually, if I wanted to come to a local conference and speak about Angular. Unfortunately, I couldn't due to scheduling conflicts, but a coworker reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to talk. And everybody sort of has a coworker or somebody that they know who is passionate about your topic or a related topic and can come and talk. And I will just say, like, offering any kind of help, like, I'm pretty new to the whole speaking experience myself. Just today, Frosty helps me with my CFP for NGConf, and I just think that it's awesome that people are willing to sort of go to those lengths to welcome new speakers, which is, a big thing if you're trying to increase diversity. A lot of, as has been mentioned, many times you have a sort of whole plethora of white men who can speak and have spoken before and speak at meetups and stuff. And then you have sort of the minority who might be intimidated to start speaking because they're in a minority. Maybe they'll get up and speak in front of a bunch of people that don't, look like them. And so just having that sort of help to get over the barrier of I'm a little bit intimidated is really awesome, even if it just comes from individuals rather than, if you don't have the means to hire professionals to help people out.
Yep. Well put. All right. Well, we've been talking for about an hour and a half. So I'm curious, is there anything else that we should highlight or talk about? Zach, do you still have tickets for NG Atlanta?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, we still have space. There's still a little room left in the hotel. The hotel's filling up quick, though. It's only 330 rooms in the hotel, so we're hoping to sell that out. It is going to be in January, but the pool is heated 365 days a year, so that's going to be fun.
Nice.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun.
And So we know that Kim and Ward and I are going. Joe, are you going to be there?
I'm not. I won't be there. Too many Angular conferences to attend. I also canceled NG Vikings, which really disappointed me, but I had to cancel NG Vikings as well.
Gotcha.
I was really excited to go up to Finland, but no.
Cool. Well, I'm also just going to highlight one quick thing with NG Atlanta that I'm doing. So I'm not going as a speaker. I'm mostly going as an attendee, but one of the things that I have done at past conferences for Microsoft, in fact, this is where I got the idea, is the guys at .NET Rocks invited a whole bunch of podcasters out to Microsoft events, and that's why on JavaScript Jabber you get the periodic rash of 3 or 4 Microsoft-related topics or Microsoft people talking about topics on the shows. And I thought, well, dang, this would be really cool to do for some of the other communities that we have shows for. And so I reached out to Zach. I reached out to some of our sponsors, and we have Progress or Kendo UI sponsoring my trip. And I'm going to come down and I'm going to be interviewing several of the speakers, attendees, etc., and just kind of painting a picture of what it's like to be there, as well as just creating content with people who are doing Angular and speaking about Angular and sharing their experience about Angular. And so I should have a handful of videos, that are interviews and other things that we will be putting up from NG Atlanta. So, and I'm also going to pull together a meetup probably one of those nights. So even if you're not in Atlanta, but you want to just come and hang out and talk code or life or whatever, that'd be great too. But yeah, and if there are particular speakers that you're like, hey, interview that person, let me know who they are, and then I will work with Zach and reach out to the speakers and see if we can line those up. But yeah, let's go ahead and do some picks. Are you ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day intense workshop class for individuals or teams. They cover Angular 4 and 2 and focus on the skills and knowledge you need for complex, data-rich applications. They also still offer AngularJS for teams supporting older projects. Bring them to your site or send developers to them in St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, DC, and other cities, and online at angularbootcamp.com. I didn't mean to plug my thingy at the end, but there we go. Joe, do you want to start us off with picks?
Sure. Just want to basically choose one thing, pick one thing, which was the movie Murder on the Orient Express. I went and saw it for the second time this week, and it was such a great movie. Took my dad to go see it. So such a great movie. It was even better the second time than the first time. I mean, it doesn't even begin to compare with how epic Star Wars was. But I think Ward would, he'll definitely agree with me and that later. And of course,
plus, thumbs up for Orient Express. That was really good. Yeah. Good fun.
There you go. That's my pick.
Awesome. Ward, what are your picks?
As I said earlier, I watched The Last Jedi. And really, is it The Last Jedi? I mean, how many have they got the last of? I can't keep track of the titles on Monday night. Anyway, Monday night was like one of the longest 2 weeks of my life. It's so boring. And predictable. So that's my anti-pick. My pick is I just got a book I've been waiting for the last year. It's a translation of the Odyssey by Emily Wilson. And I've got a thing in the, a link to the show because the thing that people are talking about is it's the first time that a woman has translated Homer into English. And yay. But what I really like, because I've been following it for the last year, is I like what she writes. She's really a great writer, and this is a very different translation than the ones I've been reading. And I've read a few translations of Homer over the years because I don't read Greek. And she has done a really great job of making it poetic and accessible at the same time. And I'm just cracking into it, but it's every bit as great as I hoped it would be. So Emily Watson's translation of the Odyssey.
Nice.
Wilson, not Watson, Wilson. Emily Wilson.
So I'm going to jump in here. I have to bring the net count back to 1 for Star Wars. So I went and saw it this morning. There were a few things in it that I was like, wait, can you do that? But it was a good movie. It rates somewhere between the prequels, which were terrible, and the originals, which have a lot of nostalgic value for me. And that's all I'm going to say, because if anybody spoiled it for me before I went, I would have been mad. I'm also going to quickly mention I'm putting together Indiegogos. As this goes out, they'll be out, so just come check out the show notes for the links. Indiegogos for 3 new podcasts on devchat.tv. One's on React, one's on Vue, and that one, Joe and I are kind of working together on that one, and I've also got some other people that have reached out about that one. And then one on Elixir, so if you're interested in functional programming, Elixir kind of stuff, we're doing that. And then, I guess that's all I have for picks. Zach, what are your picks?
So I got 2. One's a organization called Vets Who Code. It's an organization for retraining veterans as they come back from service. Fantastic organization. They're actually helping with our free veterans workshop at NG Atlanta. And the second one is actually a movie that hasn't come out yet, but it's a Netflix original, and that's Bright, the new Will Smith movie that's on a Netflix exclusive, coming out in 2 days.
Awesome. Now, Jerome from Vets Who Code, he's the CEO. He did shows on both Ruby Rogues and JavaScript Jabber, so if you want to know more about the organization, go there. And then Jerome was a regular on Ruby Rogues for a while, so if you want to just kind of get to know who he is, you can go find some of those episodes. And finally, the best for last, Kim, do you have some things you want to shout out about?
Sure. These can be anything, right? They don't have to be super recent.
Yeah, we kind of blindsided you with it, but yeah, anything, TV shows, tech tools, whatever.
Well, I will sort of follow suit with Zach, and I'm going to mention NG Girls, because I had the honor of mentoring an NG Girls workshop at Angular Connect this year, and that was actually my first time sort of having direct contact with them, and I thought that they did an amazing job. They offer a free workshop for women who are interested in Angular. You don't have to be like super experienced developer. There's going to be one of these workshops at NG Atlanta too, which I'm also going to mentor. And that's super exciting to me. I'm looking at starting a workshop for NG Girls locally. But a lot of things have been getting in the way recently. And then I guess the other thing was I've been watching a lot of Deep Space Nine lately, and I've found a lot of the episodes are remarkably relevant in the current sort of social landscape, and I've just been really enjoying that. So to sort of get off the Star Wars into the Star Trek, I guess.
Hey, I need to find some way to get a speaker gift tied to that.
Nice. Well, one last thing that I generally like to ask, and Kim, we'll start with you. If people want to follow you on Twitter, GitHub, maybe you have a blog somewhere, or just see what you're working on in general, where do they go?
Yep. On Twitter, I'm Kim Maida, KimMaida, and I'm the technical content lead for Auth0. So I actually lead all of the technical content for Auth0's blog. You can find a lot of my articles there, and then I oversee the team of technical writers who write for us, coding tutorials on a variety of tech stacks, and that's just auth0.com/blog.
A kindred spirit, because that's what I was doing for Google, so for Angular.
Awesome.
And Zach, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Z Chapple on Twitter, and then if you email info@ngatl.org, I'm usually the one that replies to that.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you both for coming and sharing your insight with us. We will catch everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.